You're listening to the B2B Revenue Executive Experience, a podcast dedicated to helping executives train their sales and marketing teams to optimize growth. Whether you're looking for techniques and strategies or tools and resources, you've come to the right place. Let's accelerate your growth in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome, everyone, to the B2B Revenue Executive Experience. I'm your host, Carlos Noche, and today we're talking about sales strategies for effectively scaling your revenue. And to help us with that, we have Greg Nutter, best-selling author of P3 Selling, and he's also a principal consulting at Soloquent, helping organizations transform their channel and direct sales teams from suppliers to trusted advisors. Welcome to the show, Greg.
Thanks, Carlos. Great to be here.
We're happy to have you. All right, Greg, our little warm-up question of the day. What's something that you're passionate about that those that primarily know you through work or business might be surprised to know about you?
I'm call myself a serial learner. A lot of people late in their career, write a book, whatever, they stop learning. And I probably read about half a dozen books each month on a wide range of topics. Science, technology, certainly business. I really like to keep up to date and enjoy learning other people's perspectives and ideas outside of just, my expertise in sales and marketing. So it's love to learn new things.
Love it. Feed your brain. I like that idea. All right. Help our audience get to know you a little bit better. What was your journey to success?
My first job in sales was a fully commissioned job. You don't sell, you don't eat. Right. So fortunately, I sold. I was guessed, got lucky, became successful, and I was in a consultant in recruiting. After a few years of that, I was fortunate enough to join a company who at the time was one of the two big companies that did sales training, Xerox. And what I learned at Xerox was really eye-opening, that sales is less of a art and more of a science. It's less about personality and more about process. And that light bulb went on for me, and I decided I wanted to really understand this. So I spent a lot of time, reading books, taking courses. I became a sales trainer because I wanted to watch interactions. Xerox, when we were a sales trainer, we didn't just, sit behind a whiteboard and flip slides. We went on sales calls. And so we had this directive, it was like the Star Trek directive, where you just sit and watch, even if a sales rep goes down in flames. And it's amazing when you watch the interaction as opposed to the deal, what you see. And so I learned by watching. Over the years, I've been continued to be a seller. I've been a sales director, a sales leader. I've been a fractional VP of sales, and I've done sales coaching for a lot of big organizations, big tech companies. Like I've done work for Microsoft, SAP, Hewlett Packard. So a lot of the big companies, but I've also worked with little companies where they want to figure out what the big guys are doing so they can have an advantage. So that's kind of my journey. If somebody asks, what am I? I'm a sales guy. I like to sell. I enjoy doing selling right.
All right. Hey, along the way here, I noticed that for whatever reason, my connection seems to be a dog today. So if you need me to repeat a question, just let me know. So Greg, in your book, one of your first chapters is about what is selling. For our listeners that may have not have read your book so far, what's your response? What is selling?
Great question. I ask that question all the time. And my favorite one from a sales rep said to me once, he said, it's getting people to buy my stuff. And so while that's right, it's the question isn't about what do you want as an outcome. It's what do you do? What are the behaviors, right? And because if you don't understand the behaviors, how do you get good at it? So selling to me is about influence, getting people to change, and particularly getting to change their perspectives, their behaviors, and their situation, right? So I want to change their perspective around what's the best product, around why a problem is particularly important, why do we need to take action now? It's influencing that perspective. And so what it involves less talking about product and more delving into a customer's problems and opportunities that they might be trying to capture.
I like that. I got my own little twist on it, and maybe it's just because of my slow-moving brain. But I talk about the fact that no one I know really loves to be sold. We never walk around going, I just got sold this new car, or I got sold this new house. In fact, if they do say that, it's usually not a very positive experience.
Right.
But we all love to buy, right? I bought a new car. I just bought a new house, Greg. And then it's about this positive experience you just had in making this purchase. So I try to, maybe it's just really flipping it over. But I think, when I talk to folks about becoming better sellers, like you got to help facilitate the buying process. Think about their buying journey. Like you said, influencing them in finding the right solution to solve their problem, impact their business, to get their impacts that they're looking for.
Yeah. In fact, if I can build on what you just said there, Carlos, instead of saying I don't like to be sold to, basically people are saying I don't like to be told to. I don't like someone coming in and telling me I have a problem, telling me that I need to take action, telling me that this is the best solution for them. There's a reason why the cover of my book, if you look at it, has a light bulb on it, because that's what good selling is. It's about saying, I understand that this might not be a big problem now, but other organizations have told me that if this goes on for too long, this could happen. And you want somebody to go, I hadn't thought of that. That's a really good idea, right? So it's that light bulb moment. People like that. They go, he didn't tell me. He suggested something that I might be concerned about. I thought about it and I agreed. That's selling.
Excellent. I like that perspective. In fact, I was on a podcast, and I just recently recorded a podcast with a gentleman named John Westman, who's a Harvard University professor in sales. And I like talking to John because he challenges me. He always has a different way of looking at something. We may end up in the same place, but he challenges me every time. And we were just talking about sales, and it's a topic that's come up over and over again. So I love your opinion, Greg. I think today, let's face it, over the years, sales has not had a great impression. In fact, one game I play with folks is I ask them to close their eyes, and I say, I'm going to say a phrase, and I'd love you to share, what comes to mind. And I say, salesperson. And Greg, you can imagine, most of the times the image that comes to mind is not a positive one. And it's sad because it's your profession, it's my profession, right? And we help people be great at this profession. So I'm coming full circle to the point that I try to remind folks that sales originally was really a profession of service. We help people solve problems with whatever product or service we're selling. We help them achieve some outcomes, not that we bamboozle them and trick them into buying something and getting a transaction. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. When you tell people that you're in sales, a lot of people, like you said, have a very different opinion or view of what that is. They think of the cringeworthy behaviors of the hard close, the manipulative questions, telling you what you should think, droning on about your product, right? But I'll tell you an interesting situation. Last year, I had a law firm, the owner of a law firm, reach out to me and said, hey, I read your book. I wonder if you can come and run a workshop for my team of attorneys. And you'd ask yourself, attorneys? They don't need to sell, do they? Like, when was the last time you saw, an attorney making a cold call and trying to close a deal, right? So it's that people think sales is the hard close. But in reality, if we look at it, it's about influencing people to change. And so change what? For an attorney, it's things like influencing people on the merits of their offering or their recommendations, maybe differentiating from alternatives, or helping clients make the best possible decisions. So to me, that's consultative selling, not the front end prospecting or just the back end close. It's that middle section where you're trying to get people to think, that's an interesting point of view. I hadn't thought of that. And so that's why I see it's not just people who've got the word sales in their job description need to understand it. It's a lot of consultants, attorneys, professional advisors, whatever, need to influence, and not in a manipulative way, but in a positive way that people go, I didn't think of that. And now I'm really glad that this person has brought it to my attention.
Excellent. I agree with you. In fact, I used to do this little keynote called, everyone's in sales. And of course you get pushback from folks like, whoa, hey, wait a minute. I'm in product. Or, whoa, I'm in IT. And I'm going to use your word. Do you need to influence someone to your point of view, to hire someone, to take a product in a certain direction? You may not like calling it sales, but that's really what you're doing.
Exactly. Well, you and I know there's like two big categories of sales, right? There's what we call the simple transactional sale, and then there's the complex consultative sale. And in my book, I talk about the simple sale as clerking. And it's got a classic two-step. It's you talk about your product and you ask for the order. If you don't get the order, you talk a little bit more about your product and you ask for the order again. And you go through this two-step cycle, right? And a lot of people see that as selling because that is a classic B2C model. I was talking to somebody not long ago and explained that. And he says, you know what? I went to a timeshare. And that's exactly what they did for hours. But you really need this timeshare. No, I'm not that interested. But I think you'd really value it. You'd be able to give it to your kids. No, I'm not that interested. But let me tell you why it's really important, right? So it's that two-step. And that's really annoying for people who've ever been to a timeshare presentation. But it's particularly annoying, and it doesn't work in business to business, which is more the complex sale. So that's where it's more about asking. And we have a model we call the ask, suggest, recap model, and suggesting in a very respectful way, and then asking if someone would agree. And if they don't, they don't, right? And so that's consultative selling.
All right. I love it. So our topic today was about scaling revenues, and most of the time when people hire you or I, at least in my opinion, I'd love your view. It's, hey, they created the cool widget. They got those early adopters, but just showing up and throwing up with the product doesn't work anymore, right? Real salespeople need to show up. Real salespeople need to engage with individuals, and even getting to consider maybe a product that they haven't considered before. So when we talk about scaling revenues or scaling your revenue growth in an organization, what are some suggestions that you find in helping organizations make that transition or do that more effectively, if you will?
So let me start by saying there's three things that companies need to do in order to scale, whether it's a revenue or basically scale their sales team's performance. Good sales processes, good sales management processes, and consistent execution of both. So if companies don't have these things in place, you will definitely struggle to scale revenue performance. This is particularly true with small to mid-sized companies because they have a harder time attracting those high achievers. Those guys and girls all want to work for the big companies where there's lots more advancement opportunities and better benefits. And so they don't want to work for those little companies. So the reality is companies must accept that they can't just hire a seller, give them a comp plan, and expect results. It just doesn't happen. So what's really important is you have to have in place sound, standardized processes that everyone uses, right, to train, coach, and manage the sales team, right? And so there's certain traditional foundational processes that need to be placed. And we talk about 4 in the book around prospecting, around call management, around opportunity strategizing and management, and around pipeline management. And if you don't have those things in place, you're crossing your fingers and hoping.
And as one book said, hope is not a strategy.
Hope is not a strategy.
All right. So as these organizations are, let's face it, let's say they start out as a startup and, they're running with their hair on fire. What might you suggest as some steps they would take to start, continuing that journey? Where should they look first?
So the first step I'll tell people is that you need to adopt a methodology. There's a lot of them out there. I worked for a company that had some of the leading methodologies, but what struck me was, there's no shortage of them. If you and I know there's probably, let's say, thousands of methodologies, probably tens of thousands of sales trainers, millions of books out there on selling. And, in my consulting career and coaching, sales rep, I go, nobody's using this stuff. What's the problem? Part of the problem is too complex, right? So anyway, the first thing is to select a methodology, concepts and strategies that you can adopt, that you can use, that's approachable, that looks like it's sound, right? You could do this by reading a book like mine, P3 Selling, or you could run a training workshop. And there's a lot of organizations, myself included, that run a workshop. The key thing is to start using tools based on the methodology that guide a seller on how to apply it. It's the application that causes or allows a methodology to stick. It's not just going through a training program or, we used to learn lots of training program and it was like, great job, Greg. Thanks for coming in. Let's get back to our whatever we did before, right? Doesn't stick. So even if you run a refresher program, a lot of companies tell me, said, hey, you ran a workshop, you read your book, blah, 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 because you run a refresher. The refresher needs to be less about the concepts and the strategies and more about how do I apply them? How do I use them in my day-to-day job, right? Critical. The second big area, and I find this is not just little companies, but big companies too, is management involvement. The classic saying, and you probably identify with this, Carlos, is that the single biggest point of failure in rolling out any sales improvement program is first line sales management. Because if they're not on board, if they're not using the stuff, nobody's going to use the stuff, right? So they need to use and apply the tools in their one-on-ones, their joint calls, deal reviews, QBRs, team meetings, right? That's where the understanding and reinforcement happens. It doesn't happen by reading a book again or going through another training. It's having somebody coach you on day-to-day. How do I use Greg's process to strategize in a deal? Well, let's do it. How do I analyze my pipeline? Well, let's follow the steps and let's do it on your pipeline, right? That's how you start to adopt it. And I think back to your original question is, once you get a critical mass of people who are doing the same thing, they start learning from each other, they start reinforcing each other, and then you start to be able to scale that team.
And your third one was consistency. So
yes.
Is it doing the first two that drive the consistency?
Well, you need a basic understanding. It's kind of like, the first is kind of understanding what it is. It's then applying it and making mistakes. And then you go to the, what you call the conscious confident, where I know what I'm doing, right? And then you go to the unconscious confidence, where it's just second nature. So it doesn't happen overnight. It's that, and that's where management plays a critical role. It's like CRM adoption, right? If you don't use the CRM in your one-on-ones, in your reviews, in your QERs, and if it's not in there, it doesn't exist, right? Then why would you expect your reps to use it, right? So it's applying that what you want people to do in those management processes, which then people start to see value in it, and they start doing it without being told they have to do it.
All right, so let's double down on this role of managers. And you said it was frontline managers, but I think it's all of them. But you're right. I mean, your direct supervisor, boss, whatever you want to call it, that controls your comp plan, is usually the person you're going to listen to the most. And I always have a little comment of, you got to inspect what you expect. So I can get them all excited about what it is. I can start getting them feeling more confident on being able to do it. But if next week they show up and you're not following through, we're dead in the water. In fact, one of my jokes, Greg's, are they're going to look at me and say, "That was amazing, Carlos. I loved it. Best sales training I've had this week." Then they're going to turn around and look at you, the leader. "Hey, how much of this are you really going to make me do?"
Yeah.
And I go, if you blink, man, we just burnt some money.
Yep.
So what strategies do you have to really, because I feel like, the first group that I need to convince, and that's why it's the first group I usually train, are the leaders.
Yeah.
So how do you convince those leaders to make it part of their DNA so that it can become part of the DNA and culture of the company?
I want to build on one thing before I answer that question. I agree with what you said around it's not just first-line management. I've worked with a lot of companies that say, well, it's the sales manager's job, right? But who's coaching and mentoring and inspecting the sales manager, right? So I'll work with owners. I've worked with a number of owners and presidents around what is it that you need to do to hold that sales manager accountable? Because if you don't, they're going to go back to whatever they did before, which was probably just being a sales guy, right? All right. So with regard to getting sales management adoption, I'll tell you something I'm doing now. So I just ran this workshop recently for a company in Michigan. They sell robotic equipment to robotic systems to the car manufacturers. And at the end of the workshop, we have an exercise which says, okay, how are you going to pay back what we just spent on Greg? So what are you going to do over the next 90 days to adopt some of the concepts here in your day-to-day activities, selling activities? So we want sales reps to put together a plan, right? And present that to the management. Now, what I've proposed is that we have a session where each rep presents, it'll be over Zoom this time, what they're going to do. And then the last presenter is the sales manager. The sales manager needs to present what is he or she going to do differently. And ideally what you want is the sales reps holding the sales manager accountable, right? He said he was going to do this. And once the sales manager stands up in front of 10 reps and says, I'm going to do this in the next 30, 60, 90 days, then I think it's much more likely that they will, right? Now, in addition to that, we are going to have follow-up refresher sessions, but it's less, again, about here's what Greg thinks selling is, right? Or let's talk about let's take a deal. How did you apply this? Getting people to use it. And the sales manager needs to be part of that process, right? And if not, then it won't stick.
I'm with you. It's one of the things we talk about in my sessions is about creating this mutual success plan with your buyers. And I go, when they come to you and they go, hey, here's what I have so far. And you grab it, put it aside and go, but is the deal coming in or not? You just basically told them that wasn't important. And you got to realize that these little micro behaviors that you're having are sending out a message to your team. You spent all this money on Greg, for example. You told him these things are important in the workshop. You said you were 100% behind it, but then you never mentioned it. You never made it part of your process. And when they went for the ones that actually went the extra mile to even try to fulfill on the promise of their action plans, you ignored them. You didn't help them out with that. You didn't put importance around it. And getting managers to kind of realize and prioritize that has always been a challenge, but it's something that I try to focus on more and more these days.
Absolutely. In fact, I'll give you another example. So P3 selling stands for the three things that you focus on in influencing, which is someone's perspective of a problem, the people who have that problem and their perspectives of the problem, and the buying decision process, the criteria, the steps, those kinds of things. So that's P3 selling. So I was talking to this sales leader about exactly that. I said, part of the reinforcement comes from you, not the program. And he says, well, what do you mean? I said, well, what do you typically say when you talk to a rep about a deal? You'll ask 3 or 4 questions. How much is it? When does it close? Right? What's the next step? And he goes, yeah. I said, well, maybe you should be asking something different. Like, what problems are we trying to solve? Who are the people that are impacted by the problem? Do we know who they are, what their perspectives are? What's the buying decision process? Where are we in that? How are we positioned? Based on that position, what should be our ideal next steps? So if you ask questions that reinforce the methodology, then you get people thinking, geez, I'm just trying to close the deal, right? Instead of asking the typical questions, which is, when's it coming in?
I agree 1,000%. In fact, you mentioned now about asking questions, and you mentioned it earlier. I think selling is all about asking questions, not about making statements. And the more questions we can ask, the more curious we actually seem to a buyer also about them, their business, and their own processes that they're working through. And you talked about influence at the beginning. So I'm assuming in P3, which I haven't really read it either, but I want to set it up for people to read it, is there a lot of time spent on asking questions within a sales campaign, and what makes good questions?
Absolutely. So like we talked about earlier, people don't like to be told, right? But just asking questions by themselves isn't always helpful. I like to say, there's different kinds of questions, and we explore a variety of question types and when they're helpful. One of the things I tell people is that, fact questions allow you to quote. So a lot of people say, how much are you paying for this right now? When's your renewal? How many people are on that program? Great, I now can go out and quote, right? So fact questions allow you to quote. Questions around a problem or addressing an opportunity allow you to sell. But questions around the importance and urgency of a problem allow you to motivate. Have you ever been in a situation where, you put out a proposal and for some problems that somebody said we have to address, and they ghost you? Everybody goes quiet? Well, because, I got a problem here and I got a problem there, and I wouldn't mind that opportunity there, but I got other things. And so if you don't create awareness around why a particular problem is important to solve, why it's urgent to solve it, to quantify the impact of not solving it, then you can't expect someone to prioritize it. So we spend a lot of time on the difference between fact questions, on problem questions, on importance questions. But there's another model which I think is really valuable in consultative selling. Sometimes they'll ask a question of, Carlos, is it important for you to solve that this year? And you might say, not really. Right? So I want to create awareness that it might be. So instead of asking, again, are you stupid, Carlos? Of course you should be solving it, right? What I do is I suggest, I'll go, hey, Carlos, fully understand why you might not see that as important. But, I was just at a client the other day, and they told me that their boss came down, and if they didn't get that solved by the end of the year, they wouldn't get their bonus. Now, I don't know if that happens in your company, but if it does, that, I'm sure you wouldn't want that to happen. And you want Carlos to go, I hadn't thought of that. I could miss my bonus if I don't get this fixed. You're right. We need to do this, right? So it's that suggest and then confirm, right? And that causes people, if it's a good question, for the light bulb to go on and say, I hadn't really thought about that, but that's a good point, right? So it's a combination of asking more problem and importance questions as well as suggesting. And you can use that suggestion around, not just around problems and opportunities, you can use it on people. Hey, you know what? I know we haven't got Bob involved in this process, but last company I was with, we didn't get their finance guy involved last minute, and the whole thing blew up. So would you see value in getting Bob in finance involved early? So I can suggest people. I can suggest criteria. hey, your IT department has told us they only want technology where we've got 5 references, right? But another company did that and they got locked into some really old school stuff. I mean, I'm guessing you wouldn't want that to happen here, right? So you can see the value of changing that spec. So I can do that ask, suggest, recap model all through the buying process. And so it's a very valuable technique. And we spent a fair bit of time on that.
I like it. I like it a lot. It kind of, there's for example, the Challenger sale. We don't have to talk about it here, but at the core of it, I thought it had some good concepts.
Absolutely.
How it went about it, I wasn't great on. Your comment of, hey, if we make these suggestions is a great way, in a way, to challenge their thinking and get them to start thinking about other perspectives, other avenues, and why they might be important or a priority now. So I love that. So Greg, I like to pivot a second. So when organizations are really trying to drive revenue growth, one of the aspects they go into is really trying to build out channel or partnerships to kind of grow their footprint or outreach through other organizations. And that's one thing that we kind of brought up in our topic, is it's not about just direct sales, but it's also the channel, if you will. Any suggestions for establishing that part of our growth process and how P3, hey, it's still the same thing or it might be a little different?
I've actually had the opportunity of doing a lot of training and coaching and advising on the channel space. And channels are different, but not dramatically different than selling directly. The key difference is perspective. You can't tell a channel what to do, right? Well, you can tell a sales rep, you do this, I'm going to fire you. So there's a lot more nuance to it. There's more finesse to it. I had someone reach out to me over LinkedIn not long ago, and they asked the question, Greg, I sell through a channel. I sell a product, a service through a reseller channel. Is P3 selling going to help me? And I said, yes, but there's a different perspective. The perspective is, one is, what are you selling? You see, in direct sales, you're selling a solution to a problem, right? Or a way to capture an opportunity. You're not selling your product. You're not selling your widgets. You're selling, how do you fix that problem or how do you capture that opportunity? In channel sales, there's 2 different sales cycles. One is called the initial land, the initial deal, right? A licensing deal or a reseller agreement or whatever like that. And so it's like, I have to think, it's not about my product. It's not about my service. It's what does that agreement get for that reseller? And then your whole pitch needs to be around that. It's like, well, this will allow you to grow. This will allow you to expand your reach. This could improve your win rate. This allows you to create larger deals because you get to bundle other products into the same sale. This allows you to go back to existing customers and do add-ons, right? So that's the first one. Why should I partner with you at all? Once you've done that, then you ask yourself, well, what am I selling? Because I've already sold this contract. You're selling what I call a change initiative or an investment initiative. What's that? I'm trying to get them to do stuff, right? So I'm trying to sell them on doing things. So it could be, Carlos, I would love your company to run a campaign for me. I want your company to train your reps on our new product. I want you guys to invest in more enablement, right? So now my thinking is, I need to get you to do things that build the relationship, but I need to put it in context of what's in it for them. Right? Why should they train their team? All my partners want to train my team. They need to be out selling. All my partners want me to put in a new system. It's too much money, right? So you need to put in perspective of how does it help them. And so if you have that perspective around, you're not, follow on, you're not selling a product anymore. Product, they don't care. You're selling a change in their behavior or investment in their behavior, and you need to put that into context of what's in it for them. So if you have that in mind, then P3 selling is very applicable. All of the, the questioning techniques, the focus on solving a problem, capturing an opportunity, are all very applicable.
I agree with you. It's Matt, I try to tell folks, it's like, hey, selling through a channel is not necessarily dramatically different, but you got to realize you're trying to sell the channel first, like you said, on why they should invest and learn your product and try to position your product. And then you're trying to sell through that channel on basically your products plus them. Because when they're out there, they're not out there just trying to push your product. They're trying to push whatever their services are around it, usually around your product. So I love your perspective, your comment about it's all about perspective. And, we could say it's the same thing for anything we sell. Do we understand the buyer and their perspective on what their problems are and what situation they're in? And if you can have that level of curiosity and connection, you can have a higher likelihood of success. Hey, Greg, I'd love to talk to you all day, but they're going to yell at me if I make these too long. So I'm going to jump to our last question of the day, which is, hey, and you've given us tons of great insights so far, but we call this acceleration insights. What might be that one piece of advice you would have for our listeners? And Greg, this could be business or personal that would help them be as successful as you have been.
Whenever somebody tells me, what one thing could I do differently starting today to scale my success, my performance, I tell sellers to become an expert on the problems you solve, right? So focusing on solving customers' problems really should be at the center of the universe for every seller. I like to say that without the context of trying to solve a customer problem, any discussion around product, price, options, decision process makes no sense. Our product is 30% off today. Who cares, right? Right? It makes no sense at all to talk about product without the context of what's the issue you're trying to solve. So I tell people you need to keep it top of mind. Put a sticky note, on your computer. Put it on your notepad when you walk in, right? And becoming an expert on problems you solve is more than simply being able to list it. You need to have a detailed knowledge of why the problems are important, who they often impact, options available to deal with them, how companies go about solving those problems. Your goal is to understand the problems better than your prospects or your competition, and then lead every selling interaction from the perspective of creating awareness around the importance of solving them.
Excellent advice, Greg. I love it. All right, Greg, if people would want to learn more about yourself, your services, your awesome P3 selling book, what might be a great way for them to engage with you?
You can find details and a lot of testimonials on my website, p3selling.com. You can search me down on LinkedIn. There's a P3 selling page as well as Greg-Nutter in LinkedIn. Connect with me. I write a post on there either every week or every other week, and promote great podcasts like yours, Carlos. So if you want to stay in touch, reach out in one of those. If you look on Amazon, check the book. Don't take my word that it's a great book. Read the reviews. We're as of today about 90 reviews, and I think I got 1 3-star and 2 4-stars, but the rest are all 5. So check us out and see if it's something that would be valuable for you.
Awesome. Well, great advice today. I really enjoyed talking to you, Greg. Thank you for taking the time and being on the podcast.
Thank you, Carlos. Very much appreciated.
All right, folks, that does it for this episode. Please check us out at www.b2brevexec.com or your favorite podcast platform, be it Spotify, YouTube, iTunes. In fact, if you check us out on iTunes, please give us a 5-star review. We'd greatly appreciate it. I'm Carlos Noche, and I wish you nothing but the greatest success.
You've been listening to the B2B Revenue Executive Experience. To ensure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in iTunes or your favorite podcast player. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.